Hello and welcome everyone to the National Veteran Small Business Coalition's virtual training series. Today we welcome back Polaro Maza, Chrissy, and Cy. It's great to have you back, and I know we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of different types of mentor-protege programs, and you're going to do a deep dive for us on the SBA All Small. So I'm going to quickly turn this over to you and let you take things away so we can learn all about the various programs and how they may be of benefit to our businesses. So.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you again for having us on. This is I don't even know, fourth, fifth in a good series of going through a number of different topics, different issues. On one of the last ones, we did a deep dive on the DoD Mentor Protege program, given the procurement stance of the Department of Defense and how things have been looking in the federal space at DoD. So there's been a lot of questions about that. And then after that, there's been a number of questions about some of the other mentor protege programs out there at the various agencies, and especially the preeminent program, we'll call it, at SBA. It's important to note, just as a general matter, that a few years ago, SBA took the position that only statutory programs were authorized unless SBA specifically evaluated it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of the programs that SBA has looked at and approved at the various agencies. But DoD's is a statutory program and SBA's is a statutory program. So those are a given. And the other important thing to note, just as a general matter before we jump in, is that you can use SBA's program anywhere. And ultimately speaking, and I know I addressed this in the last one too, if you get size protested or if there is some sort of challenge under any of the programs, this goes to SBA. So these determinations go to SBA to review and make a ruling on. And so in every case, you have to follow the general SBA size and affiliation rules, which also gives a special benefit to SBA's program because it can be used anywhere, you get the benefits anywhere, and it also has very clear, I should say somewhat clear, regulatory rules about how to set them up. And there's a lot of case law addressing some of it too, which can reduce some of the risk. So with that being said, I'm here with my colleague, Chrissy. Chrissy, do you want to introduce yourself? And then you can kind of take us away into the wonderful world of the mentor protege programs.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Chrissy. I'm an associate at Polaro Maza, and I work primarily in the government contracts group. I just traditionally work a lot on bid protests for mentor protege agreements and joint ventures for businesses, but I also work with Cy on some corporate items and am happy to help wherever I am needed.
Yeah, and this is just a little bit about our firm generally. We deal with all kinds of different matters, as Chrissy was mentioning, from government contracts, a lot of M&A transactions of all shapes and sizes, construction matters, you name it, litigation, labor and employment. We kind of help our clients with all manner of things. So if there's ever any issues or if things are implicated by any of these programs, always happy to help.
So as an overview, as Cy said, we're going to cover the Small Business Mentor Protege Program. If you didn't see the prior recording of the Department of Defense Mentor Protege Program, we'll also touch on that. And then we'll touch on the other agencies that have their own mentor protege programs, whether they are approved by SBA or as the Department of Homeland Security, it also has its own statutory authorization to have a program. Then finally, I'll provide a little comparison chart so that you can easily see the main points and the differences between all of the programs. So we'll start with the SBA's program, and some background on the program is it used to be two. So it used to be the All Small Mentor Protege Program and the 8A Mentor Protege Program. A couple of years ago, it was combined into just the SBA's Mentor Protege Program, covering all of the different socioeconomic designations. And at a high level, the purpose of the program is for mentors to provide proteges with different types of assistance, and that assistance can be contractual, financial, technical, or management assistance. Within this relationship, mentors can enter into subcontracts. Mentors and proteges can enter into subcontracts with each other. And also a mentor can own up to 40% of the protege, which is important as that means the mentor can provide its protege with additional capital through its equity percentage in the protege. To actually enter into a mentor-protege program, the mentor and the protege must have an SBA mentor-protege agreement, and the SBA provides a template for that, but you'll want to tailor it to your specific relationship, which we do all the time for clients. So if you need assistance with that, definitely feel free to reach out to us.
And you really got to think about like what you want out of the program and talk to the mentor should talk to the protege should talk to the mentor, because this is and we'll get into this as well, but it could be up to a 12-year program. So when you're thinking about what assistance everyone needs, it should be really what the mentor actually can provide and what the protege actually needs, because as again we'll get into, there can be measurement metrics. The SBA can look at that. They can take it into account when they're dealing with whether the mentor is living up to its obligations. I've even seen situations where companies have at least thought about the potential of litigation if they feel like the mentor didn't do what they were supposed to do, or the mentor decided to go another direction, things of that nature. So you want to kind of think about this and be serious about it, especially if you're the protege, because you have a limited number, which we'll also touch on in a little bit.
And so a question, Cy and Chrissy. So the mentor can own up to, I'll just say up to 40% of my business. How does that impact size standards, or does it not impact the size standard if somebody, especially the mentor, and if it's up to 12 years, then is my business now affiliated with the large mentor? Maybe you're going to get into that in slides down the road. I don't know. But yeah, I kind of wanted to ask that question on that. And if we're going to get into it a little later on, then we can wait.
Marie, that's actually a perfect segue, because we are going to talk about one of the biggest benefits of the SBA's Mentor-Protégé program, which is that mentors and proteges are exempt from affiliation based on the assistance they're providing under the mentorship. So if you don't know, when you're determining whether you're a small business under an applicable NAICS code, you have to include the annual receipts and the employees of your affiliates. An affiliation exists based on the ability to control. So if another entity has the ability to control you, whether or not that control is actually exercised, then you're affiliated with that entity. So imagine if you were found to be affiliated with your mentor, you could potentially be pushed over the applicable size standards, as we talked about, for up to 12 years and no longer qualify as for set-aside contracts. So the SBA has explicitly exempt people or businesses in an SBA-approved mentor-protege agreement, which means that the mentor and the protege can form joint ventures for set-aside contracts without worrying about affiliation. So typically, a small business may only enter into a joint venture with another small business, but they're also able to enter into joint ventures with their mentor, even if that mentor is a large business. And so assuming the protege is small, a mentor-protege joint venture will qualify as a small business for any small business contract. And if a protege holds a set-aside designation, such as service-disabled veteran-owned or veteran-owned, then the joint venture will also qualify for those set-aside contracts. And that includes 8A, women-owned, and hub zone as well. So to clarify, any small business can form a joint venture with any other small business as long as that small business demonstrates a commitment and an ability to assist the first small business. You don't need a mentor-protege agreement for that. In that situation, only one of the joint venture partners must have the necessary socioeconomic certification, the service disabled, veteran owned, etc., but all must be small for the joint venture to count as small. If you're under a mentor-protege agreement with the SBA, then the mentor could be large as well. So, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that also goes to the question about the 40% ownership is similar. So if the mentor owns a 40% stake, that in and of itself cannot be used against you. So you're immune to an argument that you're affiliated based on the 40% ownership. However, if it's more than just the ownership, so if your corporate documents that are structured have impermissible unanimous consent or supermajority requirements that give the mentor improper control over the company, that is not excluded. So just because you're in a mentor protege doesn't mean you can't be affiliated. You can be affiliated for any other reason except for the items in the mentor protege agreement. So you still need to pay attention to how your corporate governance documents are structured to make sure they're compliant with completely different regulations, depending on the program. And in addition to that, the issue of, well, what happens after the mentor protege is over? Because it can end with 30 days notice. So it could end after a year, it could end after a few months, it could end after years, up to 12 in theory, if the protege never had another mentor and you've re-upped it multiple times. And in that kind of circumstance, you will not be affiliated again based on the 40% ownership, because that was done under the mentor-protege program, so it can't be used against you. But everything else can still be used against you. So if whatever assistance you're providing has to stop if it's something that would rise to the level of impermissible affiliation or control, it has to stop. And that's all case law driven, right? And case law changes. So depending on wherever the world is with the law and the regulations and the case law at the time your mentor protege ends, everything could be different, right? You don't even know. We don't know what's going to happen in 3, 6, 12, whatever years, right? So people need to pay attention to that, and certain things might have to end. A lot of times the mentor wants to be bought out, but sort of requiring a buyout could also potentially be problematic. So you just need to make sure you're really thinking through the implications of having the 40% ownership. I've also had clients have issues with their protege where they buy in to the protege itself, and then the owner of the protege, let's say they help the protege really grow. The company is going from $200,000 a year or less. Now it's making 20 million a year. And the protege owner is like, this is great. My salary is gonna go from 50,000 to $4 million a year. There could be fiduciary duty questions there. So if the protege owner has a fiduciary duty to minority owners and you're just taking a bunch of money out, there could be questions there about whether or not the owner, and this is completely outside of SBA rules, whether or not the owner could be liable. So there's a lot of things to think through because you're selling your company. You're selling equity in your company. So everything that goes along, all rights and privileges and problems, right? If you have a 40% stake, banks are probably going to make the mentor sign guarantees for loans. There's a lot of things you got to think through.
And it isn't just the financial side of it, it's also the intellectual property side of it too. If the mentor has a 40% stake, and if there's additional governance, I'll say agreements put in place, the small business really needs to be aware of what they are sharing with the mentor, and vice versa. The mentor really needs to be aware of what they can gain or what could potentially impact them. So there really is a lot to be aware of when you start to think about the SBA mentor-protege agreement, because it isn't necessarily just a contract-based agreement. It's it's a living, breathing document that can span, as you mentioned before, up to 12 years. And so much can happen. I can develop technology, and if you're my mentor, you have potentially a 40% stake in that development. There just really is a lot to think about before going into an agreement of this nature, at least from my standpoint. But I'm very conservative in my business approach of selling a stake in my business. That's, yeah.
Yeah, the intellectual property piece, though, it's generally speaking, unless you do some more difficult or odd arrangement, that would still be the property of the entity. So they're taking an
Okay.
ownership stake in the entity. So as long as they're an equity owner in the entity, they in theory have a 40% stake, but it's not direct. It's because you have a stake in the company that owns the intellectual property. You have a stake in the value of the intellectual property, but it's vis-a-vis the business. Whereas
Okay.
and there could be fiduciary duty problems there too. If the protege were to do something, or the protege owner were to do something to maneuver intellectual property that was generated through the business outside of the business, or to redirect business to another entity, all that can get you sued. So you gotta be careful with all that stuff. But you get everything. You own the company. So anything the company owns, you have an indirect stake in. But if the
Okay.
company were to sell it or something like that, you would get the value of it as a 40% owner, but
Right.
you wouldn't generally be able to stop it if you're a minority owner, although it depends on what the agreement says.
Wow. Okay. This is great. Lots of good stuff to ponder and think about, and really kind of walk through when you're looking at entering into the agreement. Okay, I'll question Ferry. We'll stop for now. Okay.
No worries. Next, we're going to talk about the requirements for a mentor and a protege, and then specifically how you could apply. So we'll start with the mentor requirements. So a mentor must be capable of providing mentoring. And they also must possess good character, not be suspended or debarred. And as noted, they could be a large or a small business. They may be, or an entity may be a protege and a mentor at the same time. Nonprofits are not eligible for this program. And generally, a mentor cannot have more than one protege at a time. You can have up to 3 proteges, but you would have to prove to SBA that there is no adverse impact between any of your proteges. And then there's no limit on how many proteges a mentor can have while it's in the program. For proteges, you must be small under your primary NAICS code, or you could be small under your secondary NAICS code. But if you're seeking approval under your secondary NAICS code, the protege must prove to SBA that it has prior experience in that code. So you can't designate a second NAICS code and then immediately enter into a mentor-protege agreement without prior experience. You generally can only have one mentor at a time. If you do have if you would like a second mentor, you would need to have that second relationship be applicable to a different NAICS code, and you would have to prove to SBA that the mentorship that you're receiving from that second mentor is different and specific from the first mentors that you are already in a relationship with. Importantly, a protege under the SBA Mentor-Protégé program can only be a protege twice ever. So you really want to think about the relationships that you're entering into. And if you are in a situation where your mentor isn't providing the assistance you would like, it is possible to get an annulment of your mentor-protege relationship from SBA, but that is a very specific process, and you could talk to SBA about that, or we could help you with that if your mentor isn't providing the kind of assistance that you were expecting.
Yeah, and I think a few points of just clarification, just to make sure everyone's clear. whenever we were talking about on the last slide that the mentor can have as many proteges as it wants, that's like over its life. So as Chrissy was saying, it's 3 maximum at any given time. Now there's a caveat to that. If you buy a company that is a mentor that has a protege, you could in theory have more than 3. But yeah, that's really the only exception to that. And if you want to continue, if you want a new one, you have to ramp off some of the old ones. But there's no limit on the life of the company. If your company lives for 100 years, you could, in theory, have a bunch of proteges, right? Whereas to the point that Chrissy just made here, a protege only gets 2 in the entire existence of its business, no matter what happens to it. So once you've had 2, you've burned it forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Unless you have to go through this annulment process where they can wipe one of the burned ones off your books and you can get it back again. Generally, you can only do that if it's been within the first 18 months, and then you go through that process where you're sort of petitioning SBA. So it's not a simple process. Sometimes people miss that mark, and then they're stuck with a bad mentor, and maybe the mentor ends the relationship at 18 months and 1 day, and you're sort of out of luck in most circumstances. So you got to be careful who you're picking here, because it's kind of like getting married. Imagine you can only get married like twice in your life. You got to pay more attention to exactly who you're picking and things of that nature. So just a few points of clarification.
So is a strategy then, if I'm a small business owner and I have several different large businesses approach me saying, "Hey, we'd like to be your mentor under the SBA, mentor-protege program." Is it better to say, "I'd love to do a teaming agreement with you first," or before entering into, the SBA MPP, to kind of test the waters, so to speak? So instead of getting married, I'm sort of doing a trial engagement here, with a potential mentor before signing on the dotted line. If I, as a small business, only get 2 opportunities, during the course of my business, is that a strategy? Have you seen that done before at all? Or
Yeah, I think you should absolutely have worked together or know each other well. And also, too often people think about doing a mentor protege to go after a particular contract, which
awesome.
SBA generally doesn't approve. That if you blatantly say this whole thing is for this contract, they're going to have an issue with that. My little like turn of phrase is that the mentor protege program is to develop your business, not for business development. And so if you're looking at it from the perspective of just getting a contract or even getting a couple contracts, that's really not what it's for. It's meant to grow your capabilities as a business so that you can stand on your own. You learn, you understand. And I've even defended false claim cases where the Department of Justice has claimed that the mentor had undue control over a protege and that the claims of non-affiliation were false, right? So that the protege wasn't really small because it was affiliated with its mentor, making it a large business. And most of those cases, it came around to control over the company. So even, again, anything outside the mentor protege program can lead to affiliation. So if you're doing things incorrectly, it doesn't give you a impermeable shield. You still have to worry about all other laws and regulations and also make sure that you're doing everything appropriately.
Cool. Okay, great. Thank you.
So a couple more specifics for the program itself. As we talked about, the term is traditionally 6 years. And again, as we talked about for a protege, that's a maximum of 2. So a protege can only be in the program for a total of 12 years, unless an exception or an annulment applies. So the relationship will continue for the 6 years unless it's terminated early by either the protege, the mentor, or SBA. An SBA can terminate at any time, but a protege or a mentor, they have to commit for 1 year, and then after that, as I mentioned briefly earlier, either party can terminate upon 30 days notice. Each year you will submit reports, and SBA will either approve or disapprove of the continuation of the relationship. And as I mentioned, they can terminate at any time. To apply, you apply on certify.sba.gov, and that has not moved over. That is correct. It has not moved over to certifications.sba.gov, where you may be applying for some other certifications. It is still on Certify. So in your application, you have to execute and submit a mentor-protege agreement. As we talked about, the details in there are very specific, and you would need to really think about your relationship and demonstrate what kind of support you'll be getting from your mentor. Both parties should be registered in SAM, and you'll each have to complete an online training module. And then you'll need to submit any other documents to substantiate eligibility in the program. The processing time now is 90 to 110 days, so it does take a while to get approved. And just another important note, if you do, as we'll talk about, other agencies have their own mentor-protege programs. So if you have a mentor-protege agreement with another mentor in another program, and you apply to the SBA's program, you'll need to detail to SBA how the agreement that you're entering into with SBA will provide different or additional assistance from your other mentor-protege agreement. SBA regulations provide that any assistance that has already been provided through another mentor-protege relationship cannot be identified as assistance that will be provided in the SBA's program. So we're going to move into the specific details of a joint venture agreement under the Mentor-Protégé program. As we talked about, a big benefit to being in the SBA's program is that you can joint venture between your mentor and your protege. So a specific joint venture is permissible where the protege concerned lacks the necessary capacity to perform on its own. The agreement must be fair and equitable, and it will be of a substantial benefit to the protege. Those 3 items will need to be addressed in your joint venture agreement, and you'll need to be pretty specific about what exactly the protege lacks and what the mentor is going to provide to the protege in the specific joint venture agreement. So the protege must manage the contract, furnish the responsible manager, and manage the day-to-day operations of the JV. They also must own at least 51% of the joint venture and perform at least 40% of the work performed by the joint venture. Finally, they'll need to receive profits commensurate with the work performed. And these joint venture agreements need to be entered into for each contract that a mentor-protege relationship will enter into or will bid on. So if you have a joint venture agreement, you'll need to make an addendum for each additional contract that you bid on. And these provisions are very specific, and it's very important to follow all the details that are required to be in these agreements. And another important note is that your joint venture agreement must be entered into prior to the submission of your proposal. So it's really important to plan ahead. If you have a non-compliant joint venture agreement, it could cost you your award, and it won't be good. Sai, do you have anything to add there?
No, just that with all of the assistance, including joint ventures, remember the actual approval has to be given by SBA before any of the protections attach. So you cannot bid with a joint venture if the mentor is large. You cannot bid with the joint venture until the mentor-protégé is actually approved and you have that letter. So remember that you can't just run forward saying, well, we applied. You need actual approval. Same goes for any of the assistance you're providing. Any assistance you provide while the mentor-protégé agreement approval is pending is not protected. So remember that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for clarifying that. So specific for your joint venture agreements, as I stated, the mentor-protégé agreement must be SBA approved. Your joint venture agreement, SBA no longer reviews and approves those. You still obviously need to be compliant within those, but the only one they require approval prior to award is for 8A sole source set aside. So any of the other service disabled, veteran owned, socioeconomic designations, SBA no longer needs to approve your joint venture agreement or your addendum for those.
Yeah, and that's been a point of confusion. So just make sure that the contracting officers you're working with understand that. And also, if you see procurements that require SBA approval, that is something that should never have been included in there. And you need to challenge that but via a protest before you submit your proposal, or you could be out of luck. You can, because it won't be timely if you protest it later. So you have to protest those sorts of requirements. Same thing goes if they say you have to show up as certified in SAM, because that does not occur. It generally does not occur. The JV itself, the LLC that you're creating, will likely not show any sort of certifications. It all hinges on the protege. And by the way, another just general point is that what it says in SAM has zero import on whether or not you're eligible for a particular procurement. The SBA rules under 13 CFR generally govern that determination, and that determination is independent of whatever is in SAM. So to the extent that contracting officers or other people are looking for an easy button to look at SAM to try to determine whether or not you or your joint venture is eligible for something, that is completely misguided, and you need to push back on that and protest if necessary, or you will waive that argument in the future. So just that's a side note, but be aware of that.
Thanks, Ty. So our final slide on the SBA Mentor-Protégé program is just a short pros and cons list to point out the large points that we have with the Mentor-Protégé program. So pros, obviously, it allows large businesses to participate in small business set-asides without finding of affiliation generally. It also helps small businesses to win larger projects. And then you only take on the receipts commensurate with your work performed. Some cons, though, there are a ton of additional regulations, and they are very specific, and non-compliance of the mentor, if determined by the SBA, may be grounds for suspension and debarment. So the risks, if you do not comply, are relatively high. And so it's really important to make sure that you are complying with all of the regulations. And as we stated, we are here to help you do that. We do these sorts of agreements all the time. Any final notes on the SBA's program side?
No, I think we're good there.
Great. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the DoD's Mentor-Protégé program. And as we mentioned earlier, there is a whole nother specific presentation on the DoD's program. So we're just going to move through these really quickly, and you can watch the other presentation if you want specific details or more information. So just as a quick background, the DoD's program was actually the first Mentor-Protégé program, the first federal program, even before the SBA. And it is completely separate from the SBA and requires DoD-specific approval. Its primary focus is on small businesses performing subcontracts and performing as subcontractors and as suppliers on federal contracts, not on the small businesses performing prime contracts. So that is a difference in the purpose with compared to SBA. So a protege can only have one mentor at a time in the DoD's program, but a mentor can have many proteges at the same time. DoD's mentor-protege agreements last up to 3 years instead of the 6 years, and mentors cannot be a small business under this program. They must be large. So some benefits to the DoD's program: for mentors can receive cost reimbursement or credit towards their small business contracting goals. And if you choose the reimbursement method, you could be reimbursed through a standalone contract or by modifying an existing contract to add a CLIN for that developmental assistance cost. For protégés, you receive guidance from top-performing DoD prime contractors. It can enhance your credibility, and you can receive new market opportunities. So to run through the DoD's requirements really quickly, a mentor must be DoD approved, and it must be a large business which has received DoD contracts and subcontracts totaling $25 million or more in the prior fiscal year. You have to be an active DoD prime contractor with a subcontracting plan and otherwise eligible for federal contract awards and qualified to assist and contribute to the Mentor-Protégé program's goals. And finally, you have to have good financial health and character and not be debarred or suspended. The DoD publishes a Mentor-Protégé approved mentor list, and you can find that just by Googling DoD MPA approved mentor list. And so if you wanted to partner with a mentor that is already approved through the DoD, you can find that list and look into the companies on that list. For protégés, a protégé must be small under its primary NAICS code, which is different from the SBA because, as we mentioned, you could also potentially have a relationship under your secondary NAICS code, but for the DoD program, it is only your primary NAICS code. You cannot be owned or managed by any individuals or entities with stock options or securities in the mentor. So again, different than the SBA's program where the mentor could own up to a 40% equity in the protege. And then the protege must be at least one of the following: our traditional socioeconomic set-asides, social and economically disadvantaged small business, Native-owned, woman-owned, service-disabled, etc. So to apply to the DoD Mentor-Protégé program, you must submit a Mentor-Protégé proposal package. And that will be submitted to a specific DoD approving agency. Depending on the type of reimbursement the mentor decides, that will determine which agency you submit to. So if you choose the credit agreement, then you would submit to the DCMA. And if you choose either the direct reimbursement or a hybrid version, then you would submit to the Office of Small Business Programs. You can have an informal introductory briefing with the DoD before you submit to make sure that your package is good and that it will probably be approved once you submit. So that is helpful. And then a term, as I mentioned, is typically 3 years. The termination provisions are a little different than SBA as well. A protege may terminate at any time following 30 days written notice, but a mentor may only terminate after a specific process has been performed. So originally, they will need to provide a written notice of proposed termination, and then the protege has 30 days to respond to that notice. And then in their response, the protege can offer a remedial program or rebut any of the findings that the mentor has found. Following the receipt of the response, the mentor can then decide to withdraw the termination notice and continue participation or issue a notice of termination. And if they do decide to terminate, then that decision is final and not reviewable by the DoD. But they must include the decision as to why they just decided to terminate. All termination notices must be sent to the DoD and the DCMA. For reimbursable agreements, copies must be also sent to the program manager and the contracting officer for the contract. So an overview of the details that go into your proposal package. The proposal package is pretty large. So it includes an executive summary, a benefits and return on investment statement, technical and cost proposals, and the mentor-protege agreement. Your mentor-protege agreement will include your mentor and protege contact information and your signatures, the NAICS code that's applicable, the specific assistance that the mentor will be providing, and its proposed developmental program, the estimated dollar value and the types of subcontracts and the timelines for award, specific term, termination procedures, and compliance statements. Specific, so in your mentor-protege agreement, you'll want to decide which type of compensation the mentor will receive. And as mentioned, there are two general types, and then there's a hybrid type. So the direct reimbursement allows mentors to receive reimbursements for allowable costs. And those allowable costs are developmental assistance to the protege. And they start on the day funds are obligated. For credit agreements, though, the mentor receives credit towards their small business subcontracting goals, and the credit is based on the developmental assistance to the protege, and it starts on the day they're approved by the DoD. In hybrid agreement, it's a combination of both, but 1 year must be credit, and then 1 to 2 years could be direct. So a couple large considerations when looking to join the DoD's program. Mentors, as we mentioned, can have several proteges at one time, but the proteges can only have one mentor at one time. The mentor-protege agreements cannot exceed 3 years. In certain circumstances, the DoD will allow extensions, but it cannot exceed the total performance of 5 years. In the DoD's program, proteges or the agreements cannot be longer than the protege's small business certification program. If a mentor's application or if a mentor's changes its name, then a new application will have to be filed. And then any statements of any of the compliance certifications that you have to make when submitting your proposal package, all of those statements and any annual reviews will be subject to the False Claims Act.
Yeah, another thing to note, just to make it clear, the reimbursable side of this as opposed to the credit side, that is subject to appropriations and other things. And there were a number of years where there were no appropriations for the program. And so there was no reimbursable program at that time. And it's also very limited. So it's sort of first come, first serve. You go through the process as long as the funding lasts. So it's not something that, because otherwise you'd be like, why wouldn't every mentor want funding? Because it's not that simple. And it also is looked at more carefully to make sure that you're actually going to provide a lot of the assistance as opposed to just credit to your small business subcontracting plan, which is a much easier feat to tackle there, and also not subject to appropriations.
Thanks, Sai. So next we'll talk about the other agencies. Sai mentioned at the beginning the little background of the difference between the SBA's program and any other agency's mentor-protege program. So now most agencies that want to have their own mentor-protege program must receive approval from the SBA, and that's the program itself must receive approval, not the applications or the relationships that are submitted to the agency. So many agencies, following that requirement, many agencies just decided to use the SBA's program instead. Like the EPA and the GSA have ended their programs, but 3 agencies still have their own SBA approved programs. That's the Department of Energy, NASA, and the Department of Transportation. So we'll talk briefly about those. And then 3 agencies have their own mentor-protege program authorized by separate authority, and that's the DoD, as we've already talked about, the FAA, and DHS. So the SBA approved mentor-protege programs are the Department of Energy. So the Department of Energy's program is designed to encourage DOE prime contractors to form long-term relationships with small businesses and increase their participation in DOE contracts. A lot of the purposes for the SBA programs are going to be the same, mainly to increase participation of small businesses in that agency's contracts. The goal is to develop technical, administrative, and managerial assistance or expertise in protege firms to help them enhance performance and become more competitive. So in addition to your traditional socioeconomic designations such as 8A, service disabled, veteran-owned, and women-owned, it also includes historically Black colleges and universities. Protégés are eligible to receive non-competitive subcontracts from their mentors. So that is unique to the DOE. Mentors may receive credit towards their subcontracting goals, and a term is a maximum of 2 years base, and then you could have 3 one-year option years. For NASA, again, the purpose is to assist small businesses and other protégés in increasing their capability to compete and perform NASA prime and subcontracts. NASA includes HBCUs and also minority serviced enterprises, and they also include the Ability One program, so long as they're a nonprofit. Mentors and protégés are individually approved in addition to the mentor-protégé agreement. That's unique to NASA. You have to be specifically approved as a mentor, specifically approved as a protégé, and then you also need your relationship approved. Mentors can have multiple protégés, but protégés can only have one mentor at a time, but they don't have a limit on how many times they can participate in the program. There is a 3-year term, and they have an award fee program for mentors with SBA and SIDR Phase 2 protégés.
Yeah, which is also an interesting point with NASA because you can see the different programs are tailored for what they do. Where NASA has a lot of research and development work that gets done through SBIR, STTR, even Space Act, which is a completely separate thing, similar to Kratos. But when you're dealing with those kinds of issues, that's where their focus is. And so as part of that focus, they're really encouraging companies to join in the SBIR, STTR programs with NASA or through those endeavors, and then get mentors that want to help and want to support those programs in particular to help really jumpstart and drive innovation and unique research. In fact, through this program, I had a client that worked on some stuff with very early on during COVID, some aerial testing technologies and things like that for large groups to try to reopen things. So there's a lot of interesting research that has been funded through some of these programs at NASA.
Yeah, and if you are interested in the small business innovative research or the small business technology transfer programs, SBA also has a federal and state technology partnership program that they can provide funding through. That's not a contract, and we didn't touch on it today because it's a completely separate program that is run by the SBA. But if you are interested in that, feel free to contact us for more information. So the final SBA approved Mentor-Protégé program is under the Department of Transportation. And as mentioned, the purpose is pretty much the same: encourages private sector relationships and expands DOT efforts to identify and respond to the developmental needs of small and disadvantaged businesses. And it's designed to improve the performance of DOT contractors and increase the overall number of small businesses that receive DOT contracts. So under DOT, there's no financial compensation for mentors. The term is up to 3 years, and there is no limit on how many mentors or protégés a mentor or protégé could have. Next, we'll talk about the independent mentor-protégé programs. So the Department of Homeland Security, it was originally operational from 2003 to 2023. And it was just recently revived in November of 24 under its own statutory authority. So the little hiatus was taken. It previously was an SBA approved program, but now it has its own authority and does not require SBA's approval. So the purpose is to motivate and encourage large prime contractors to provide mutually beneficial development assistance to protégés. And this, the DHS also includes historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions, in addition to the other traditional socioeconomic designations. Under the DHS, there is no joint venture feature. Specifically, they note that is not an opportunity. The term for agreements is 3 years, and the purpose is to provide developmental assistance to enhance the capabilities of protégés to perform as prime contractors and subcontractors. Again, for the DHS, similar to DOT, there's no limit on mentors or protégés. There's also no financial reimbursement for mentors, but the mentor could receive evaluation credit and credit towards its subcontracting goal on a dollar per dollar basis. The FAA is designed to motivate and encourage firms to assist small businesses in enhancing their capabilities to perform FAA prime contracts and subcontracts. And they also include HBCUs and minority serving enterprises, and in addition to the other socioeconomic designations. So the FAA exempts the mentor-protégé relationships from affiliation as it pertains to the acquisition management system. So if you don't know, the AMS is similar to the FAR, but it's specifically for FAA contracts. And so they specifically note that affiliation is exempt, similar to the SBA, if it's solely based on the existence of participating in the program, though affiliation could be found for other reasons. Under the FAA's program, mentors can receive evaluation points, credits towards towards their subcontracting goals, costs incurred in providing the developmental assistance, and special access to mentor-protégé set-aside procurement, which is unique to the FAA.
Yeah, and what's interesting here too is the FAA is a non-FAR agency, right? So it's like the U.S. courts or the Library of Congress or the Postal Service, where the FAR doesn't directly apply. And a lot of folks, I think, incorrectly believe that that means regulations don't apply, and that's not true. So it's only the Federal Acquisition Regulation that doesn't apply. All other like laws and regulations that would otherwise be applicable to federal agencies, executive agencies, apply here. And so that's where the FAA has tied in like 13 CFR, for instance, as opposed to FAR Part 19. So all the 13 CFR rules about how SBA views things, that would still apply. It's been brought over here. You have to pay attention to all of those rules. So the sort of case law driven nature of things and all the stuff that we had talked about at the beginning of the presentation would still apply to the FAA program, even though it is a non-FAR agency. So just be aware of that. You don't throw out all laws and regulations except those explicitly for FAA. You only ignore the FAR itself, and you look to the acquisition management system in lieu of the FAR, but not necessarily the other regulations, just to be clear.
Thanks, Si. Finally, we have a comparison chart that shows the main differences between the different programs. It addresses the length, the mentor status, whether it has to be small or large. Is the program agency specific? How many mentors could a protege have at once? Is it exempt from affiliation just by nature of being in the program? And is it SBA approved?
That is a good tool. That is a very good tool. I think I'm a very visual person. So, if I were doing an assessment, the one thing on the FAA and Homeland Security, on those slides, there was the notation that they get, credits for proposals, right? They get extra points in the proposal process. Is that for any contract that they go after, they just have to note that they're a mentor, or is it contracts where they are utilizing the protege, they get to claim those credits?
So I think it would be solicitation specific.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be determined by the agency and exactly what the solicitation says. Specifically for DHS, I think that it was required, or it was only available on contracts that used the small business subcontracting plan or required use of your small business subcontracting plan. But traditionally, the solicitation will control on that topic.
Okay, so then a large prime, if they were a mentor to a small business and they were going after a solicitation at Homeland Security or it was FAA would have to go ahead and look at that solicitation to see if they could claim credit for being a mentor.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, those were the only two that I saw that had that caveat on there, that they got solicitation credit.
I'll say too that that's generally used when there's a procurement that's being handled, right? And the mentor and the protege together are bidding on something. That's usually where you see it, to your question, or if you're going as a joint venture or something like that, where you're getting extra credit for being in the program.
Yeah.
Whereas for general programs across the board, the SBA rules give some benefit. They essentially say you can't hold the protege to the same standard that you hold everyone else to. That's been watered down a bit over time by the Office of Hearings and Appeals at SBA because of a lot of different protests of COSP4 and Oasis Plus and all these other things, because that was seen as almost like too strong. So SBA clarified that. And there also a note is that SBA is going to redo a lot of their joint venture regulations, and the mentor-protege side of things, it's just been put on hiatus because there was a lot of lobbying in Congress to kind of shut that down at the end of the year last year when all the other regs came out. And now there's sort of a moratorium with this administration on new regulations. So they're not sure exactly when that's going to happen, but I know they've been working on it behind the scenes to see what they want to do and how they want to move forward with, I don't know, you want to call it modernizing or tweaking the regulations on joint ventures and mentor-protege. So there's going to be a lot coming on this, maybe 2026. So we might have to revisit the topic, but this is where we are now.
All right. Well, that sounds like a whole nother virtual training in the future. I see that coming. So that's the joy of GovCon, right? Is all of these wonderful, it's always changing. So we always have to keep up on things. And so, Chrissy, thank you so much for the deep dive into all of the mentor-protege, agreements out there. If people have questions, they can reach out to you via email or telephone. I'm sure, I really kind of like the whole NASA concept, focusing on SBIR, on SBIR and STTR. So I know that we have several businesses in that arena as well. So I think I would encourage them to look at that program, for possibilities. With that, I'm going to call this one a wrap, and I'm going to say ciao for now, and we'll see you next time, everyone. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.